Thanks for joining us today. This is the webinar by the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators in partnership with the Groundwater Protection Council. And the title of today's webinar is How State Source Water Programs Can Work with Their USDA Partners. The purpose of our webinar today is twofold. One, just to on an ongoing basis, encourage states and USDA state programs to work together on source water issues. And then also today we'll be sharing some examples of how both state water and state USDA programs are already working together. We've got 237 people registered for the meeting today. So thank you all. I think it's mostly state water programs. We've also got some people from some local and federal programs, from some ag programs, so on. And so again, my name is Dan Yates. I'll be doing the introduction and kind of helping with the transitions between each program. When I'm done, first up, we'll have Deirdre Mason from ASDWA to talk about the Source Water Collaborative's toolkits, and then we'll have presentations from Maine, starting with Andy Tolman from the Drinking Water Program, then Juan Hernandez, the State Conservationist, and followed by Kyra Jacobs from EPA Region 1. After they're done, then from Iowa, we'll have a joint presentation between Becky Ohrtman of the State Drinking Water Program and Jay Marr, the State Conservationist from Iowa. And then the last bit will be audience questions. So we will handle all questions at the end of the webinar, and not after each speaker or after each presentation, but at the very end. So for those of you who would like to ask questions, please type those into the questions box. You should see that in your control panel. If you see a little plus button, if you click that, it'll open that up. I'll watch the questions as they come in. If some of you ask kind of similar questions, we'll just handle those once, but we'll do that at the very end. We'll not be taking any verbal questions from the people on the line. And then finally, the webinar will be available on ASDWA's website, and you see the link there. And you'll have both the video and audio recording of today's webinar available after this. So next up on the program, I'd like to introduce from the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators, Deirdre Mason, to talk about the Source Water Collaborative Toolkit.
Hi, my name is Deirdre Mason, and I'm with the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators. And just as a little background, the Source Water Collaborative was formed in 2006. It's a group of 25 federal, state, and local associations, organizations, and agencies that work together, as well as individually with their constituents, to help policymakers, planners, agricultural interests, developers, citizens groups, and others integrate source water protection into key decisions, and especially decisions concerning land use. ASDWA and GWPC are chairing the steering committee for the collaborative, which includes a number of the other organizations listed here. And I've also highlighted the National Association of Conservation Districts, as well as Smart Growth America, because they are the newest members of our collaborative. So this is the home page of the collaborative website, and I hope you've all been able to visit the website. I want to point out the 3 tabs on the top right. The SWP, Source Water Protection, and USDA tab is where the online toolkit is located that I'm going to be talking about. And the Allies tab includes contact information for members of the collaborative organizations by state. The About tab on the far right, or About Us tab, includes useful tools and resources that the collaborative developed previously to assist with local source water protection, education, and outreach efforts. So the purpose of the toolkit is to provide background information and some simple steps to help connect source water stakeholders and USDA leadership at the state and local levels to encourage collaborative approach to protecting and improving water quality and our sources of drinking water. If you're working at the state or local level, a natural ally is the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, State Conservationist Office, and State Technical Committee. The resources in this toolkit are useful for anyone working in source water protection, from those who already know their state conservationists but might be looking for new ideas, to those aiming to build a successful relationship. And each insightful tip is based on advice the Source Water Collaborative received from NRCS and from state and regional source water coordinators who recently fostered effective partnerships. And these include our friends from Maine and EPA Region 1 that are going to be speaking during today's webinar. So here you can see where we've talked about the toolkit. Sylvia Mom did a presentation to all of the state conservationists on their video teleconference back in September. The toolkit was actually launched on October 4th. I provided a presentation at the Western States Source Water Protection Forum for those states out west. And in December, Sylvia Mom of EPA also provided some information about the toolkit on the quarterly state EPA agriculture and source water call. And then we are also planning for the next update that will include a new section of the toolkit that focuses on working with conservation districts at the local level. And to build this new section, we worked with the National Association of Conservation Districts and had discussions with a number of states who volunteered to share their experiences, including Becky Ohrtman of Iowa, who's also talking on today's webinar. So I want to thank you for those people who are helpful in that. This image is enlarged from the infographic that was developed by the Source Water Collaborative and is included in the toolkit. It demonstrates the common ground between source water representatives and NRCS state conservationists. A key commonality is that both programs take a voluntary approach to encouraging participation of private landowners and operators. And note that the NRCS staff and private landowners and operators they work with may be most aware of the regulatory nature of state and federal environmental programs, so it's really important to convey that your focus is on opportunities to work collaboratively and voluntarily. This was a key takeaway from conversations with Source Water Collaborative members that we had when we had them with the NRCS staff who want to encourage source water professionals to underscore this point in their outreach process. This is the page that will come up when you click on the Source Water Protection and USDA tab for the toolkit on the Source Water Collaborative's website, or you can type in the direct web address here at the bottom of the screen. What I want to talk about first is the Current Opportunities tab at the bottom right of the slide. So if you click on the tab, you will find information about both the state 590 standards that were due to NRCS this month and also the FY13 USDA National Water Quality Initiative. The first opportunity is the State Nutrient Management Conservation Practice Standard 590. And these 590 standards are developed at the state level. They're critical for getting adequate nutrient management on the ground and provide an opportunity to consider drinking water sources. The NRCS provided assistance on 3.3 million acres in 2011 and on over 21 million acres in the last 5 years. So this applies to the agricultural producers that received NRCS cost share for nutrient management in programs like the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP, and they're the ones who must follow this standard. It's the private landowners and operators receiving funds to develop and implement nutrient management plans or to install animal waste storage structures. And from the state government perspective, some state clean water programs incorporate the state 590 standard directly into their CAFO regulations. So consultation with state water quality agencies was required for these updated standards, and we did interpret this to include drinking water. And we're all very happy to report that many state drinking water programs were successful in working with their state conservationist office to incorporate drinking water language into their 590 standard. And you'll hear a little bit more about this from our other presenters today as well. The next opportunity is the National Water Quality Initiative. So the toolkit includes information about this. It's another opportunity to leverage USDA-equipped conservation funds to get conservation practices on working lands to protect drinking water sources in targeted watersheds. So in FY12, state conservationists were directed to spend a minimum of 5% of their equipped funds, which was $33 million nationwide, on Clean Water Act Section 303D listed and threatened waters in 1 to 3 watersheds. In FY13, USDA's multi-NWQI initiative will again direct state conservationists to spend a minimum of 5% of their equipped funds, and they'll also need to identify additional targeted watersheds in addition to continuing to engage producer participation to install conservation practices in the FY12 identified watersheds. And most importantly, we believe that the FY13 guidance will specifically include drinking water. So if state drinking water programs haven't already, we encourage you to please reach out to your state Clean Water Act colleagues as well as your state conservationists to share data on watersheds where drinking water sources are particularly impaired or threatened. This provides an opportunity to ensure that source water protection areas within the selected watersheds can receive additional attention and to work with NRCS on identifying additional watersheds in FY13. The guidance is expected to come out very soon, and once it's released, USDA does plan to conduct webinars for EPA regions and State 319 and Source Water Program contacts. So stay tuned for more information about this. In addition, USDA is seeking assistance from states to help with monitoring as a means to show measured improvements in at least one of these watersheds in each state. So back to the toolkit. The toolkit has 5 easy steps to follow that identify common ground, opportunities to act, and key contacts and ideas for working with USDA at the state level and also at the local level. The toolkit helps you understand the vocabulary NRCS staff use, so you're sure to speak their language. And step 1 provides a quick overview of key USDA conservation programs that help protect and improve sources of drinking water. This is the step 2 that helps you define where your source water program or what your source water program can offer, and includes the infographic that explains the state conservationist role and what can be accomplished through collaboration. This is the infographic in step 2 that highlights what state source water programs and NRCS can bring to a collaborative effort to protect drinking water sources. It also points out the importance of using NRCS's terminology when communicating with them. For instance, I've been using the term, and the infographic uses the term private landowners and operators. So NRCS works with a variety of producers, farmers, ranchers, poultry and livestock producers, dairymen, forest landowners, including those who rent land. And so this is the term that they use, the private landowners and operators. The state conservationists can provide both technical and financial assistance to them. And the Source Water Collaborative learned from NRCS staff that source water professionals should bring a specific project or geographic area of focus to their state conservationist office to initiate a partnership. It's also important to note that because of planning and budget requirements, it may take some time for NRCS financial and technical assistance to become available. So it's important to allow time for the partnership to develop. This is the step 3 of the toolkit. It provides links to talking points, a draft agenda for a first meeting, basic source water protection slides, and key USDA documents to help you take the first steps to action. One of the 3 key actions is to call your assistant state conservationist for programs to schedule a meeting to seek guidance about working with NRCS state and local programs. based on feedback from NRCS, the toolkit suggests that you really start here. Some state conservationist offices may suggest a different point of contact. And in your initial conversation with them, so that you identify the right contacts, be clear you're seeking to develop a partnership based on mutual understanding of source water concerns and NRCS programs that can protect sources of drinking water in your state. So once you have the initial conversation, they may refer you to the resource conservationist or someone else in their office. This is step 4 of the toolkit. It lists useful resources for both source water and USDA conservation programs to learn more about each other. If you look at the box on the left, it includes links to documents for state source water programs to learn more about key USDA conservation programs and practices. And the box in the middle includes links to source water program tools and partners that will be helpful to share with your NRCS representatives. Step 5 in the toolkit provides links to key partners who can bring data, technical capabilities, and useful state and local perspectives, as well as other key stakeholders. This includes handy links to the regional and state source water program contacts and state 319 programs who are participating on our call today. And the final step of the toolkit connects you with resources to promote the toolkit with your colleagues. This includes a handout, PowerPoint, and short descriptions you can add in newsletters. The Source Water Collaborative also encourages you to let them know what you think of the toolkit, what was useful, what other information you'd like to see. And if you'd like to add your own success story, please let us know. You can also add your email address to be alerted when the Source Water Collaborative makes updates to the toolkit. And then lastly, the toolkit also includes 6 success stories that show effective source water protection partnerships with USDA programs. It also includes contact information so you can reach out to discuss the details of these stories with the source water contacts in those states. And the success stories include the Salmon Falls Watershed Collaborative from Maine, New Hampshire that you're going to hear a little bit more about today on our webinar. So that's all that I have. I just want to remind you of the toolkit web address, and if you have any questions for me, this is my email address.
Great. Thank you very much, Deirdre. That's a great website. If you all on the line, if you have not visited the Source Water Collaborative, there are a lot of tools, both what Deirdre talked about today and a lot of other good stuff out there. So moving on, we'll have now 3 presenters from the state of Maine, and the first up will be Andy Tolman from the Maine Drinking Water Program.
Thank you, and good afternoon, folks. You all could just go to the website and look at things, but probably you'd just as soon listen to us talk through it. Could I have the next slide, please? So the Salmon Falls project was sponsored by the Source Water Collaborative, and we did a lot of learning in this process that has helped to help us understand better which way is up. But I'd like to talk a little bit about the river itself. It's a river that bisects 2 states. It forms a state boundary between Maine and New Hampshire. Both states use the river itself as a water source, and the aquifers around it are heavily utilized as water resources too. Both sides of the border wanted to figure out how to do something, but had been unable because neither of us had authority to work on both sides of the river. Next, please. One of the reasons that we were moved to actually work here was that this area, the Salmon Falls and its surrounding watershed, were under a lot of development pressure. They were being converted from productive forest and agricultural land into scattered residential and commercial development, and that was making it more difficult to provide clean drinking water for the citizens in the watershed. It is listed by the U.S. Forest Service as the most threatened for land conversion watershed in the certainly in the Northeast. Next, please. So the reason we care about this, and I suspect almost everybody on the call knows all this already, but give it 30 seconds anyway. When you take forests or prime ag land and turn them into development, you lose the ability of water to recharge the groundwater and feed base flow and streams. You also tend to lower the quality of the water as it runs off because it picks up all the material that's on the surface. You know, you get more hydrocarbons, more nutrients, more metals flowing into your streams, and they become more hostile places that with flashier flows that are harder to manage for a lot of things, including drinking water. Next, please. So in the Salmon Falls, we had studies of imperviousness up to 2005, and just a week or two ago, the Piscataqua Region Estuarine Partnership, who was the parent of this whole project, did a new State of the Estuaries report suggesting that we're up almost to 10% in the larger watershed around the Salmon Falls. Now that's a fairly high number. It's definitely impacting the water quality downstream of our intakes. Luckily, a lot of the area upstream of the intakes is still forested, and one of our goals is to try to see if we can maintain it that way. Next, please. So what the collaborative worked through, and this is a little off topic but really important, was we used a tool called collaborative learning that brings together local experts and local knowledgeable people into a room and forms a place where they can make smart decisions about what they all want to do together. And it gives us an opportunity to bring people to the table who might not otherwise have been happy to be there. There's some really good resources in collaborative learning at the Wells Reserve site, which is here, and you'll be able to pick it up from when the slides are posted. Next, please. So this is what I think of as a design charrette that we held to figure out what to do with the Salmon Falls to keep it a good drinking water source. The reason I chose this particular slide is that the gentleman in the dark suit in the foreground is Don Todd, USDA, Maine Farm Service Agency. And he drove down from Bangor to be part of this group to see whether USDA should become involved and what they might be able to do to work with us. Now, this was several years ago, and there had not been a history of this kind of working together on source protection. Next, please. So the people that we brought together at that next, and one more click, please. Sorry, I shouldn't do this in ones I'm not running. Were a really good cross-section, and it's important if you're going to collaborate with NRCS that you do that, in my humble opinion, that you have local support, regional support, state-level support, as well as looking for the feds to work with you, because they really can't commit resources unless there is a local identified need and a willingness to work with their agents. So we, by working pretty hard beforehand, had gotten a lot of local folks into the room and who bought into the process and became part of our team. Next, please. So this is an almost complete list. It keeps growing, but this is close to a complete list of the folks who are partners in our collaborative. They include, as I say, a lot of state-level, local, federal partners. They all bring something to the table. They all take something home with them again at the end of the day. Next, please. So we came up with an action plan, and highlighted at the top of our action plan is our #1 priority, which is how do we keep forests productive forests? How do we conserve lands that produce clean drinking water? Then there's a lot of other things we want to do when we can't do that. But our #1 goal is to make sure that we have a healthy, productive forest and agricultural economy that continues to produce clean water as well as wood products. Next, please. So shortly after our design, charrette, we pulled together a smaller group of federal and state folks from both sides of the border. These are USDA, Forest Service, drinking water people from Maine and New Hampshire. We gathered on a cold January day and had a really long heart-to-heart talk about what we all needed for our programs to work, and tried to find places where we might be able to work together. There was a lot of bravery involved on all sides because we were working beyond our normal areas and comfort zones. Next, please. So we have a big complicated infographic, but the piece that where we try to work together in ways that make sense for our local partners, for our state level partners, and our federal partners, where we all see something that will happen good out of the work we're doing together. We're working on, and in this case, we're trying to work towards better forest management, more productive forests, less pressure for conversion. Next, please. One of the key pieces of working with NRCS is that their district conservationists are really well connected to the localities they work in. This is the Wayne Monroe with Kyra talking about cornfields in this case instead of forests, but he has been a key piece of the puzzle in actually getting processes moving once we made commitments. One more, please. And we had another water prize celebration. If you win a U.S. water prize, you want to carry the bowl around and display it whenever you can, so that you can remind yourselves that you've done something good and that you have a lot more work to do, because now that you've won a prize, you have to actually accomplish something to deserve it. And Kyra, Don Todd, Juan, and myself. Anyway, so that's all I had to offer. I think I'm almost on time even.
Thank you, Andy. That was great. Nice bowl. Next up, also from Maine, will be Juan Hernandez, who is the state conservationist from Maine. Take it away, Juan. We may be having some technical issues. Juan, are you still on the line? Well, we may have to come back to Juan. Let's move on then to our next speaker. And it'll take us a minute to get that next PowerPoint up here. Kyra, I hope you're standing by. Our next speaker up will be Kyra Jacobs from EPA Region 1.
Hi, Dan. I'm here.
Great. Take it away, Kyra.
Okay. I'm trying to shift gears here. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Kyra Jacobs, and I work for EPA's Region 1 Drinking Water Source Water Protection Program in Boston, and I work with all 6 New England states, and fortunately have had the great privilege of working with my colleagues in Maine and New Hampshire on this project, but also more broadly with USDA, NRCS, and Farm Service Agency. So Juan and Andy and I presented this topic a lot together, so I thought I would take a slightly different tack in what I was presenting because I had a copy of both Andy and Juan's presentation. So even though I was supposed to be batting cleanup and bringing up the rear, I think this will work well anyway because I'm going to sort of provide a background for all of you state folks on the phone. I know there's about 200 people on this webinar right now, and I have had the opportunity through ASDWA and GWPC to talk to my state source water colleagues about this project and keep getting the same question, which is how do we replicate this work in our region or our state? So I'm going to try to speak to you, the person who is looking to further leverage the relationship with NRCS or at the county level with the National Association of Conservation Districts through the soil and water conservation districts in your state or counties. So with that in mind, I'm just briefly going to talk about our project and the work related to Salmon Falls, but talk about how we used it to move forward into other watersheds and also other ways to work with agriculture and the forestry community in other states. So Deirdre, you can switch to the next slide, please. Quick overview. The three things I'm going to talk about is implementing USDA's action plan in the Salmon Falls watershed and how we replicated it in another watershed in New Hampshire, 2 other watersheds. And lastly, ideas for all of you, as I just indicated, what worked and why. So I'm going to show you the same photo that Andy just showed you in the next slide, which is, Deirdre, next slide, please. Okay, perfect. So I'm picking up where Andy left off. So as he said, I like the word he used, it took a lot of bravery on everybody's part because some of us had never worked together, USDA, Farm Service Agency. Myself and Juan are in the middle of that photo, and the map of the project is behind us. And in that photo, it's quite symbolic, are the 2 state executives for the Farm Service Agency, both Don Todd from Maine and Jay Finizzi from New Hampshire, along with the state conservationist for New Hampshire, Rick Elsmore. And we had never met these folks, and as it turned out, those partners from USDA, along with the Forest Service, my colleague Ted Lavery and drinking water colleagues from the state of Maine and New Hampshire, Paul Suska and Andy Tolman, and the Soil and Water Conservation Districts, we all had ideas about how we could work together, but we literally had to sit down and learn each other's language, and that's what we did that day. It was a 5-hour meeting, which I had the distinct pleasure of facilitating, and what we did was we talked to each other about what our needs were. And for example, if you are working in a watershed where there isn't a lot of traditional agriculture like we were, we did not know until Juan and Rick explained to us that NRCS has money available through the Farm Bill to help us with what the term is non-industrial private forested landowners. So those are folks that own more than 10 acres. And unbeknownst to us, they are eligible for Farm Bill money, including EQIP dollars, which is what we're using. Next slide, please, Deirdre. So what the district conservationist, who was in the photo previously with myself, Wayne Monroe and his boss, Juan Hernandez, and New Hampshire NRCS, proposed this great plan, which was as follows, these 3 phases. So because we're working in 2 different states, a watershed that straddles the state lines, it made everything more complicated. So that was part of the role of EPA to help try to bridge the all the folks and all that long list of partners that Andy showed to you. So phase 1 started in FY12. So we got this great idea from NRCS to have landowner outreach events. So see the lovely poster to the right. That was something that New Hampshire NRCS funded through 3 different watershed groups on the New Hampshire side of the river. And then the next step would be through those landowner outreach events to encourage landowners to apply for Farm Bill money, EQIP dollars, to develop what's called a forest management plan. And for those of you in the agriculture community, this would be the ancillary plan to, for example, a comprehensive nutrient management plan for a traditional farmer, but on a smaller scale. And again, if you own more than 10 acres. And lastly, in fiscal year 2013 and beyond, we were encouraging landowners to apply for and implement NRCS conservation practices. So that's where they would actually do things like road crossings, upgrading bridges, stone fords, or riparian buffers, and all sorts of things. Next slide, please, Deirdre. Okay, so in phase one, this is an example. This was our first event. It was in New Hampshire, and we have at the table landowners who gave testimonials about their experience working with NRCS on the ground, going into NRCS district offices. On the far right is the district conservationist for the county that we were working in, and he talked about, we had a topic called Show Me the Money, and Dan talked about, here are the NRCS programs that could apply to you, and really got positive feedback from these landowners. And the state conservationist from New Hampshire was so thrilled because, you know, this event was held from 6 p.m. till 8:30 p.m. and at 9 o'clock there was still approximately 40 landowners standing around talking to the folks that had booths there, and were really excited about this project. And it's because it was their community. Next slide, please, Deirdre. So when you explain to people that this is their landscape and, you know, they have an opportunity to help protect water quality, and a lot of them are drinking it, it becomes even more compelling. So in phase two, in the past year, landowners came in and applied for NRCS funds to develop these forest management plans, and to date we have 22 landowners for a total of 3,976 acres that will be developing these forest management plans. So next slide, please, Deirdre. So the goal would be to have these folks, that's me standing on a bridge that's about to be built, where we're going to try to improve water quality to avoid turbidity, and this happens to be a farmer who owns hundreds of acres of land that is forested and hopefully will remain forested. But the intent is to help landowners realize the value of their property, and they can keep the land forested and not necessarily have to develop it or sell it to a developer, but they can harvest timber as necessary, and in some cases logging roads have to be put in, and this allows them to do that. That's what this is. This is a logging road to allow the landowner to harvest the timber. And so just wanted to point out this is an example of what a conservation practice is. Deirdre, thanks for changing the slide. U.S. Water Prize ceremony this past year. Again, getting some public acknowledgement of our efforts was really appreciated. We had so many different partners that couldn't be there, but it was just great to share the stage with both Juan Hernandez, Rick Elsmore, who were in that cold dairy barn with us 2 years ago in that other photo that you just saw. And it just shows you that you have to start at the local level where you're on the ground, but then you can achieve great things together. Next slide, Deirdre. So this is the slide that shows the report that Andy highlighted for you, and the report is very helpful for us because I'd like those of you who are in the part of the country where you see those red highlights. This is for those of us who are struggling with our, Deirdre's putting the cursor where we're located, our project, but for those of you who are located in parts of the country where you're going to see development pressures, this project is for you, because I think that it can be easily replicated in your neck of the woods, so to speak. But for the other colleagues who work in other parts of the country, I'm going to get to that in the next part of my presentation here. Deirdre. So just a quick sidebar, and my second goal for this talk is to tell you that we were able to replicate this through the leadership of Rick Elsmore, the New Hampshire State Conservationist. He really was inspired by the work we did in the Salmon Falls. So 2 more rivers in New Hampshire are in the same category as the Salmon Falls. They're listed as number 3 and number 4 in the Forest Service report in terms of projected experience the most change in water quality as a result of increases in housing. So the third part of the presentation, next slide please, Deirdre. USDA just released a report, and this is something that we use as a platform for the work that we did in the Salmon Falls. But back in 2010, USDA presented its goals to OMB with regard to their top priority goals, and one of the 9 was related to water quality. And I won't read all the text for you, but you know, the one sentence that really struck me from the most recent report, Secretary Vilsack has made protecting water resources a USDA priority. And it goes on to talk about the nexus between protecting America's surface supplies of drinking water originating on land that USDA programs impact in some way. So it is spelled out in black and white that USDA is clearly a partner and is just as vested in these in this work as we are in the drinking water programs at the state and regional level. So next slide, Deirdre. I wrote down 2 slides with very specific ideas. So I won't read this to you, but I'll just quickly tell you. I think, and Deirdre covered a lot of this in the toolkit that we've discussed that she presented at the beginning of the webinar. But what I would say is that going to a state technical committee meeting is probably the best thing you can do in terms of getting to know your NRCS colleagues and other partners. However, I recognize in other parts of the country you can't drive to those within 3 hours like we can. I was told that some states used to fly partners to their meetings, and I imagine with budget constraints that's not the case anymore. But I don't know. You'd have to ask your NRCS state conservationists if there are any opportunities to call in via conference calls. But in my case, I've been very fortunate. I've been able to attend 5 out of 6 in our region so far, and the only one I haven't been able to attend yet is Vermont's. You can also ask once you have an opportunity to meet your NRCS colleagues if you can make a presentation. Through our work with the Salmon Falls project, both myself and Paul Suska from the New Hampshire Drinking Water Program were asked to present at a state technical committee meeting in fall of 2011. And then last year was fantastic because when I was able to present at the Rhode Island State Technical Committee meeting, it was a week after the National Water Quality Initiative had been launched, and Juan Hernandez was able to give me some background information so that when the discussion occurred at that meeting, I really understood it and how it related to the work that we were doing. Number 3, you can meet with the state conservationist if his or her staff, if you happen to be in the state. So as I mentioned, I haven't been able to attend the state technical committee meeting in Vermont, but I was there for another meeting, and we sat down and went through all of the different ways we can work together going forward. You can also attend a local working group meeting. My only experience with this is in Maine, where I've attended a county level meeting with my colleague Wayne Monroe, who's a district conservationist, and again, just talk to your NRCS colleagues and see what opportunities might exist for you in the areas you're interested in working with them. Next slide, please, Deirdre. So this is an example. Jay Marr, who you're going to hear from in a few moments, he was kind enough to host us. I have a colleague in the TMDL program who asked me to cover this meeting for him because he couldn't attend. As Deirdre just mentioned, the 590 standard was an important opportunity for us to coordinate with our colleagues at NRCS. And again, I won't get into details. However, this was a success story where the drinking water staff from the Connecticut Department of Public Health were not at that meeting. Their counterparts in the 319 program were and weren't familiar with the language related to drinking water protection. So thanks to Jay Marr, the state conservationist in Connecticut, we were able to pull in the state and make sure that the drinking water needs, source water protection, was being addressed adequately as they finalized their standard in Connecticut. Next slide, please. We've been really encouraged by the Source Water Collaborative to work with the National Association of Conservation Districts, and that was a foreign idea to me, but I did some research and found out that they were hosting their regional meeting in August 2011 in our state, where I happen to be located in Massachusetts. So we were able to get an opportunity for my state colleague, Paul Suska, to present about our Salmon Falls project, and that was a great opportunity as well because the state conservationists, 5 out of the 6 were at that meeting, with the exception of Juan, who was on detail to headquarters at the time, but their manager was there from DC, and it was, I learned so much from meeting all of them, and it made it easier to contact them and to get invitations to speak at their state technical committee meetings. So NACD meetings can be a really good opportunity. Along the same lines, NACD holds statewide meetings. I went to an annual one in New Hampshire. They have county NACD meetings if there's a particular geographic area you'd like to work in. And lastly, this, in terms of education and me understanding how NRCS conservation practices work on the ground, this has been the best way for me to understand how we can work together. And we've also learned in our region that when you get out on the ground with any of your partners, you really learn so much more, and you get to know each other's programs and what the needs are. And I think that's how Andy and I really, and Paul Suska from New Hampshire, have established the common ground with our colleagues. So next slide, please, Deirdre. Upper left is the National Association of Conservation Districts hosted a annual meeting of all their executive directors in Maine this fall, so we called them up and asked if we could present, and Andy presented at that meeting, and that's one of our farmers. That's the president of NACD on the left, John Larson, and York County, so NACD director from Maine. That's me out in the field learning how to use one of the NRCS tools, and Wayne Monroe with one of the farmers on our field tour. And just a huge thank you to Maine for everything, all the educational opportunities they've provided me and my colleagues. And I'll end with that, and last shot of Wayne and myself in the field. Again, just an opportunity to learn from each other and see what the challenges are on the ground and where we can work together. And I've included my contact information. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Kyra, very much. Juan, I think we got you back on the line. Are you on there?
I'm hoping. Yep. Yeah, I saw my name.
That's great. We can hear you.
There you go.
Thank you. Well, then next up is Juan Hernandez, the state conservationist from Maine. Go ahead, Juan.
So let me start with an apology. What a great way to starting a presentation. I happen to have, I think, the wrong pen or whatnot. But here we have a beautiful picture of the Salmon Falls River, which is the source that we are trying to protect. And I just adore this picture. So go to the next one, please, Deirdre. The next one is a map. That you have seen the map, but all that I want to point at you, and hopefully it's not too blurred for you not to see, is the size of this project. It's 210,000 acres. And that has an importance to the practicality of what we are attempting to do. And this is the way that I look this presentation to you guys, is to give you ideas, concepts of what you can walk to a state conservationist or any given partner to move forward with any given project. And if you come in with a project that engulfs 14 states, it will be very difficult to move forward. I mean, something to look into it is the size and the magnitude of what is that you are trying to accomplish. That's what I wanted to point out to the map. It's a split between New Hampshire and Maine, like Andy Tolman mentioned. By the way, this presentation can be easily completed with Rick Elsmore, but I was the lucky one selected to speak to you. I just wanted to point that out. Move to the next, please. The next slide is the background that Andy already presented, so for sake of time, let's go to the next slide. It's identical to what Andy Tolman presented. So the background here, this one, it speaks of the rapid population growth being the key governing concern for this watershed, and the fact that the U.S. Forest Service tagged that watershed as as the most threatened. So it is at this point that Kyra and Don Todd from FSA and Andy Tolman reached me, actually, and invited me to join their meeting. And like Deirdre mentioned early on, I did have a little tiny bit of apprehension with sometimes the regulatory side, because people need to understand, and all of you need to understand, that our livelihood from NRCS relies on voluntarily work. People work with us because they want to, not necessarily because they have to. So we protect that voluntarily basis to the core. But as soon as I heard and learned that this water source protection was a voluntarily basis, that made me feel at ease to certainly move forward to, okay, this is something that I will not be forcing people to do, I will not be, so this is voluntarily, I can see this working for us. Let's go to the next slide, please. And it is after that meeting that they keep talking about in January, and yes, it was cold, and I was the only one with a long sleeve shirt, being the only Puerto Rican in the room. So here we came up with these goals, protecting water quality, land protection. And I want to mention on land protection, it is not all about easement acquisition and whatnot. It includes, and that is something that I feel very strong about it is the land conservation by virtue of connecting the people with their own land. A lot of people simply don't know how their woodlot looks like and the potential for it. And that's what I wanted to, that's one of my goals, is to connect these people to their land and developing forest management plans and implementing best management practices and educating them that will connect them with the land. And something that before somebody might don't think a whole lot if somebody offered them, hey, you know, would you sell me a parcel, you know, a back lot to develop or to build a house or whatnot. If you don't know, you can easily let go of that land, but now that you have an ownership, now that you have a connection with your land, you are more likely to say, not now. This is not a good time because I am doing something with my land. I'm really proud of what I'm doing and accomplishing, and I'm doing something for the greater good. And that is something that's what we want to hit that core in our land ownership, or operators for that fact. Go to the next, please. The next slide should be, oh, there you go. Okay, so and these is the programs that we in NRCS are utilizing, which is the EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentive Program. That is one, actually it is our biggest financial assistance program. It is the same program that is helping us with the National Water Quality Initiative. I just wanted to point that out. And last year in 2012, Rick Elsmore and myself, we decided to create an initiative. We call it the Salmon Falls Initiative, and we agreed to fund every conservation activity plan within the targeted area. That was a commitment that we both had, and it is on conversations for 2013 and 14, more likely 14, the inclusion of the Farm Ranchland Protection Program, the FRPP, and we are currently working with the Wildlife Habitat Incentive Program through the cottontail habitat, which is one of the key threatened endangered species that NRCS have decided to help promote. And these Salmon Falls watersheds do contain portions that are a prime habitat for these bunny. Go to the next slide. So this is what we accomplished actually during the fiscal year, from the time that we met to the time that we start moving started the ball rolling. We agreed on these conservation activity plans, and we hosted in Maine 4 workshops, quite successful workshops. We had a lot of interactions, farmers. I mean, I was delighted to see the participation. And for these workshops, the local conservation district, I established a contribution agreement with them, and they help us actually put them together, and it worked great. Let's go to the next slide. And here is the final numbers for last fiscal year. NRCS in Maine, we wrote about 20 EQIP forest management plans. In New Hampshire, ended up with 3. totaling 3,900 acres between New Hampshire and Maine. Keep in mind that 2012 was phase 1, and phase 1 was all about planning. It's about letting people know what they could do on their land, just to see what was the potential. And it is our intent in 2013, and we can go to the next slide, to start implementing those plans. I mean, this is the fun part of this project. Yes, I mean, we had all these plans, and now we are taking a look at what we developed in fiscal year 2012, and this is the time to get them in the door and to implement some of those plans. I have set aside, let me think, I think that I set aside about $250,000 for implementing those conservation plans, those conservation activity plans that we developed last year strictly for the Salmon Falls watershed. So I have devoted exclusive monies for the usage of that watershed. And that's one of the things that you want to seek, is to identify an area where it's feasible and practical for a state conservationist to put some additional resources or specific resources to pursue a common goal. And we will be developing additional plans this year as well. It is my intent to continue developing as many plans as I can. And these will go on, like the timeline says. It is my intent to continue working very closely with this watershed until 2015. Of course, I will have to be paying attention to what the Farm Bill will do to us and what kind of tools we will have in fiscal year 14. But we are good and set to go for 2013. Next picture, slide, please. Here is a list of conservation practices, and I encourage you, if you're not acquainted with them, to at least get a little better feel for what are those conservation practices. That is the core. That's what we do, folks. I mean, that's what we implement. We plan and implement a number of conservation practices to help air quality and water quality and threatened endangered species and whatnot. But this is all about water quality. And my computer went into, okay. Oh, I'm back. Okay, so that's just a handful of practices that I encourage you to take a look at them and be familiarized. At least they make sense for the forest type work that we wanted to accomplish, that we want to accomplish in the Salmon Falls. If we go to the next. Here we have just a handful of pictures. That is just a stream crossing. Is a heavy armor stream crossing. We go to the next, and all of this work, you can tell, is smack in the middle of woodland, forest land, and this is a lined waterway. In order to handle a significant amount of water, it has to be rock, otherwise it will erode tremendously. So that's the reason that is lined with stone, to handle the velocity and the volume of water coming from the field. The next slide, please. Picture. This is a bridge. Actually, we replaced a culvert, and we are having actually a timber bridge for access. And you see little portions of the access road as well. This practice allows the individuals to now manage their land according with their conservation activity plan, their forest management plan. Go to the next, and this helps tremendously with erosion, so you know. The next slide, that is an access road. And the next one is another beautiful example of how a timber bridge looks like. And you can see the riprap and the stabilization of the bank. Those practices have such a significant impact on the water quality. Otherwise, in some instances, equipment is going through the river, and you can imagine the amount of erosion that is creating. The next slide goes to the epitome of how these access roads should look like. That's what we are driving. That's what we're trying to accomplish for the most time is trying to not fragment our forest land and do what we need to do. So now here you're looking at a classical, typical way of an access road. I just wanted to, this should be my last slide. Go to the next. We have, that is just a mention of what Andy mentioned, some of our partners and who help us and who will continue working with us together to continue moving forward this project. It's all about commitment. It's about timing. It's about you know, and having Kyra and having Andy being there and introducing this concept, I would have never been engaged. And I have to tell you, I love this project to the core. It makes sense, but the fact that they brought it to my attention, if they would not had, we wouldn't be where we are today. And that's what I want to encourage you guys to take a look at the tool that Deirdre presented to you. There's some good, and you know, at this point, the way that I looked at it, it's not much to lose. There's many and much to gain, and that's how I really want to look at it. You need to understand that the state conservationists get hit. We get bombarded. We get a barrage of requests from everybody. Some ideas you will not believe what sometimes they want us to do, but sometimes it makes total sense, like what Kyra and Andy approached me, and I'm thankful that they did, and I will yield the presentation to the next person. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Juan. You were well worth the wait. So that concludes the main portion of the program, and now we'll be moving on to a joint presentation from two people in Iowa, and they'll actually be presenting here together. So we've got from Iowa Becky Ohrtman from the Iowa Drinking Water Program, and Jay Marr, the State Conservationist for Iowa. Go ahead, guys.
Thank you, Andy. I'm Becky Ohrtman. I'm the coordinator for the Source Water Protection Targeted Program for the Iowa DNR. In the interest of time, I'm going to kind of skip through some of these slides pretty quickly. You can advance, Deirdre. Thank you. Something I want to get across is that Iowa's topography and geology are very diverse. You can advance again. Once I quit talking, you can just advance. How's that? Okay. I want to clarify, too, that our source water protection programs focus mainly on groundwater systems. The majority of our drinking water in Iowa comes from a groundwater system. You can advance. Our greatest concern here in Iowa in drinking water is for nitrates in both surface water and groundwater. Go ahead. That's just a couple of shots there showing urban non-point source and rural non-point source. You can advance. Sometimes when we have these sources near a very susceptible shallow well, as in this photo, this is non-point source again. Just want to indicate some of our problems are these susceptible wells. You can advance. The next slide is of point sources. We also want to look at point sources in our source water protection program. You can advance. And in 2007, we initiated some pilot projects. The first thing we want to look at in our pilot projects is determining whether the nitrate source is from a point source or a non-point source. You can advance. Through work with our contaminated site section, who has many tools, when we work with groundwater systems, we do these groundwater site investigations for those highly susceptible communities. Our resources allow us to do about 3 of these the groundwater site investigations a year. We have about 228 highly susceptible community water supplies in the state of Iowa. You can advance to the next slide, please. As NRCS had indicated earlier, I think it was Juan, our programs are very similar in that we're both voluntary. So I just wanted to reiterate, we don't go to a community unless the community calls and says, we would really like your assistance in source water protection planning. You can advance to the next slide, please. In 2007, when I came on board to this program, what I noticed EPA saying is we'd really like to go to a watershed-based approach. And looking at past work with NRCS and Department of Ag, they know watershed-based approaches pretty well. So it was a natural to bring in NRCS and ask them for their assistance in source water protection. Please advance. We have common goals here. We want to see source water protection, groundwater protection, drinking water protection for today and for many generations to come. And the other goal throughout many of our conservation partners, as well as our own source water program here in Iowa, is that we want to protect our natural resources for the long term. You can advance, please. Mainly, here I wanted to really iterate what and why we wanted NRCS involved. My past work since 1994, working with NRCS and other conservation partners, is mainly they know how to implement things. So it's for source water protection in Iowa, it's really a time to start implementing practices. And not just a one-day workshop or something, but actual really looking at assisting our community water supplies and installing practices to protect their drinking water supplies for many, many years to come. I know that USDA NRCS understands non-point source and best management practices. There's just a list of reasons here of why I wanted to have NRCS involved. But one thing probably to get out to this audience is that the majority of our public water supplies do exist on private lands. Please advance. Again, the reasons why NRCS does planning so well and working with them for nearly 20 years. They do planning, and they know how to begin with planning, and they know how to end with implementation and evaluation. And again, we have many common goals. Please advance. And now we go to Jay.
And thank you, Becky. Greetings to all of our partners across this great nation, and it was so refreshing to hear of all the comments coming from those good deeds coming from not only East, but we'll be talking about the Midwest, and there's plenty of good action going on in the West as well. You know, it's a pleasure working with Becky. Becky has inherent knowledge of our technical assistance that we provide. As most of you know, that NRCS is the lead federal agency for conservation planning and implementation on private lands. And through that process, we utilize a 9-step conservation planning process to ensure really what it is a logical and comprehensive approach to identify and to address natural resource concerns. It is a customer-driven process. It always has been. We've used this since post-Dust Bowl days, and it's resource-focused, okay? And that's the beauty. As you know from many of you folks, that if you go back the number of years that I've been around, we were the SCS. Before that, we were the Soil Erosion Service, and now we are the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Next slide. So let's take a look at the 9 steps of planning, the conservation planning process. And it begins with the identification of the problems. And I want to relate this more towards source water protection. So when we ID the problem, one might think that would be, is the field within the 10-year groundwater travel time boundary? Okay. Something else that you might want to ask yourself is, do the wells have water quality issues? Are there other wells that have water quality issues? Okay. And then the second step would be to determine the objective. You always have a conservation objective. And later what we also look at too is we like to make sure that those producers can do it in a way that that keeps them on the farm. So that would be sustainable agriculture. So is that objective to reduce agricultural nutrients, pesticides, microorganisms, the contaminated wells? What are the goals out there? What are the conservation goals? What are the goals of that producer? And as Becky would say, that a lot of it is on private lands, right, Becky?
That's right. Okay.
Third one would be the inventory of the resources. Okay, let's take a look at that landscape out there. What are the current agronomic practices that are being practiced on there? How many wells? Where are the well capture zones? And we've got a lot of tools that can help us too, as far as LIDAR, as far as GIS layers, and I hear from my people and also from your people that 10-year, if you will, 10-year groundwater travel distance, that's going to be a layer, correct?
Yeah.
And that's going to be available. The next one is analyze the resource data. Determine the potential risk to that wellhead from that field. The fifth one is to formulate alternatives, and that is which conservation practices have the potential to reduce the risk to address that resource concern. Some of the practices that you'll hear about will include nutrient management, and that's why that 590 practice. And by the way, in Iowa, Kyra would be happy to know that if you will, wellhead protection, source water protection is addressed in the Iowa 590 spec. And that was Becky working with our specialist here, Eric, and they got that done, didn't they?
Yes, they did. Thank you, Eric. Yes.
So, and we look at rotations because I think that's quite interesting for me. If you look at rotations, do we know what's happening under the ground? Different roots have different depths that they can go and scavenge out nitrates. It's wonderful when you look at different rotations. You have opportunities for cover crops, diverse cover crops, buffers, native grass seedings, and I believe we'll see a success story with native grass seedings as well, and with creating wetlands. Okay? The sixth one is to evaluate those alternatives. Okay? You evaluate this with the producer. You evaluate this with the clientele that is going through the conservation planning process, and let's look at establishing the impact of those alternatives and reducing the risk, right, to those source water areas. And then we need to make the decision. And basically, this would be the clientele. This would be the producer. This would be whoever's going through that conservation planning process. They need to make the decision on what's the best fit for their operation, for what their goals, what their objectives are. Remember, this is voluntary conservation. The eighth one is to implement the plan. And isn't that where that's the good stuff? That's what they're working so hard for, is to install that practice. Without that, it's just a dusty plan that sits on the shelf, isn't it? Okay? And the ninth step is to evaluate that plan. You know, after you install a practice, you need to come back. You need to find out, is the system effectively addressing the resource concern? Do we need to add additional practices afterwards? But realistically, that is a very important step, is we need to evaluate the plan. We need to come back and take a look at it. Next step. Next slide, please. So as you can see, that conservation planning is very important to us in NRCS, and it's very important to our conservation partners. It can be done on an individual basis with the landowners. It can be done on a watershed basis. You know, there's a time in history where SCS was even doing it with the multi-stakeholders, and it was called the Coordinated Resource Management Planning Process. Okay? So if there's anything that all of you should remember, what is your 9 steps of planning? With that, I'll turn it over to you, Becky.
Thank you, Jay. That was excellent. Next slide, please. I just wanted to throw these up. This is kind of since 2007, the Source Water Protection Program for the targeted communities has implemented these types of steps. Next slide, please. Okay, now I'm going to go into our case studies here. This is the work that we've been doing with NRCS. I'm just showcasing 2 of these communities. We'll start with Remsen. If you want to move forward, thank you. This is where Remsen is located in Iowa, northwest Iowa, and Elliott is the other pilot project in southwest Iowa. We began in 2007 with Remsen, Iowa. When we first met with Remsen, they were looking at a $2.1 million RO system. And along with that went about a $60,000 a year operating maintenance. And this community was a little bit concerned about that, but those were going to be necessary to address the high nitrates in their public well. And then in 2009, we initiated a project with Elliott. Next slide, please. I'm just going to give you a quick view here of Elliott, and you can continue with the slide. We had a number of folks on our planning committee. This is something that I really started stressing when I came into this program in 2007. Source water protection needs to include your conservation partners. NRCS was very instrumental in this project. Having your landowners in the area on that planning team, another thing that's very instrumental. Please advance. I wanted to give a timeline because traditionally when I came into this program in 2007, it appeared that source water protection plans were kind of being made within a few months. And if you want a real success story, it doesn't happen overnight. It's a lot like the watershed-based approach that EPA requested back in 2007. This is like a watershed project. You have to have your conservation partners involved, and this is just a timeline of how much time it does take to actually get to success. And in 2012, we're looking at quite a success for the reduction of nitrates in their city wells. And advance the next slide, please. Through collaboration with many partners, again, at Remsen, there's a site investigation conducted, and working with the landowners, identified an over-application of nutrients on this site. Please advance. There's a lot of things that happened in between that dash of 2007 to 2009. Through the investigation, through a lot of partners, the city looked at all their options, and looking at where that priority area lied, they saw the opportunity to acquire that land that's in the yellow there. And they utilized what we have for the state of Iowa has Watershed Improvement Review Board funding, which this was the first project that ever received funding from WIRB to address a nitrate in groundwater to a water supply issue. So they acquired that land, and then to the left there is another parcel of land that the heirs had decided to sell at the same time. Please advance the slide. Bringing in other partners, NRCS connected the source water planning team with the local PF chapter. Those folks came in. Oh, PF stands for Pheasants Forever, by the way. And you also have the Youth Pheasants Forever chapter involved in this project. There was about 100 acres there that was converted from cropland to native grasses. As Jay indicated, that's one of the tools that NRCS has, is being able to assist our communities with implementation of different practices such as native grasses. Please advance. One of the other issues that come up down the road is who's going to maintain that 100 acres there. And again, you have Pheasants Forever conducting some of the burns on that land, you know, that needs to take place in order for the habitat to flourish in that area, but also to maintain that land for long term. You know, if corn prices go up to $10 a bushel, you know, there's some communities that would look at putting that land back out into cropping land and forgetting about maybe the impacts that might have on their wealth. So I just wanted to iterate there that there are many partners, but not only for installing, but also for maintaining that land. Please advance. One thing I wanted to mention here, not only do we see a reduction in the nitrates for this community, but for the Iowa DNR Source Water Protection Program, it's about a 1 to 47 ratio there, the cost-to-benefit ratio I'm talking about. My program put in about $16,000 to do this groundwater site investigation, among other things there, and what this community received back through different grants was over $700,000 back. So economically, it's a good thing, but also natural resource-wise, it was very beneficial for the community. In the long run, they're also looking at installing walking trails in that area and potentially an outdoor classroom in the near future. Please advance. I wanted to show this slide mainly because it's also the utilities board at Remsen who went out every month and took water samples from every well and submitted to the State Hygienic Laboratory. So this helps us with our success story in the end to really identify how the nitrates stair-stepped down over the last few years. Please advance. This is the next community that was a pilot project that we worked very closely with NRCS on. A little bit of history on Elliott. It's a very small community, but it has a very big heart. We had a lot of folks participating on the source water planning team. Please advance the next slide. In 2010, we initiated Elliott in about 2009. In 2010, I wrote a 2080 agreement with the Golden Hills of RC&D. At that time, the coordinator was under NRCS and had a lot of knowledge of working with partners. And I wrote the 2080 mainly to help this community get connected with a lot of different grants to install the BMPs that were decided upon. Again, to the next slide. Elliott had nitrates trending higher and higher. It didn't look like those were going to revert at any time soon. The main thing here I want to show is that their nitrates were trending up and they were becoming very worried. Please continue to the next slide. Their options are somewhat limited. When you look at Elliott, they were looking at about a $650,000 nitrate removal system as a potential mechanical means, but it also would come with a price tag of about $50,000 a year for their operating and maintenance. So they looked at mechanical means, and they looked at maybe not doing anything at all, but as you saw, their nitrates were trending much higher, so they needed to do something. Please advance. The Source Water Protection Program conducted a groundwater site investigation. I won't go into the details of that in the interest of time, but it was one that identified some priority areas and some possible solutions. Please advance. The solution here, and I want to start from saying, if you want to have a good solution, you better have your landowners and NRCS involved from the very beginning. Don't go out and do an investigation and come in and tell everyone this is what you need to do. They need to be part of that investigation. The landowner was out there. He was with us. We worked on things together. We had many partners involved in this. And after the team, the source water planning team came together, they looked at their options. They looked at the price tags. They looked at a lot of things here, and they decided that they wanted to present to their city council a plan that included restoring a marsh. Please advance. And you can advance right away again, Deirdre. Thank you. We just wanted to show that we do provide a lot of information with our partners' assistance to these local planning teams so that they understand the denitrification process and how things do work with installing these natural practices. Please advance. You can advance again, Deirdre. Thanks. I wanted to show this slide mainly because this is a lot of the work that NRCS did. They gained the permits necessary to install this wetland. They worked with the landowner very closely. They did the survey, layout, and design. They found the programs. They did a number of things on this project that this probably would have never been implemented without the assistance of our conservation partner. Please advance. I wanted to show this slide. This is not the completed wetland, but I wanted to show what this community is hoping for. The school had many, they were very actively involved. They donated 5 acres. This wetland will be right out the back door of the school. The FFA and the city worked together. The land that was donated to the city for this project, because it was a season that all the pieces hadn't come together yet, but the city did own the land. The school's FFA, Future Farmers of America chapter, and the city worked together and put in a crop, and with the proceeds of that crop, they put that towards the future outdoor classroom for this community and for a walking trail through this wetland. 5 landowners in town actually sold part of their land to the primary landowner. That was part of his wish list, that he would sell his land for this marsh if he would get some landowners to sell to him. So that was kind of another community effort there to get that done. The PF chapters, not only the Montgomery County PF, but also the neighboring PF chapters from another county put in money towards this. The Soil and Water Conservation District put in funding for this implementation of this project, and also the neighboring Soil and Water Conservation District thought it was such a great project. They put down funding that way too. Please advance the next slide. There is a groundbreaking ceremony at this community. This last fall, there was over 100 people that attended this, and it's just a quality of life improvement for this whole community and for the school system there. Please advance. Again, it took many partners. It started out with a few landowners in NRCS and Department of Ag and the Source Water Program working together with the community, and it grew and grew and grew into a very successful project. They will be breaking ground here soon. We're waiting for the frost to go out of the ground right now, but things are moving forward. And with that, I will pass it over to Jay.
Thank you, Becky. It's really exciting to see the accomplishments and what a community can do together by coming together. And that will be the topic of my talk. Will be making the connection, bringing the communities, the agencies, the public together. And in this particular case, I came to, as a number of you would know, that although I had came to Iowa about three months ago, what was going on here was absolutely admirable. Becky had been working with our NRCS staff, so I'm going to be talking about what brought this whole collaborative effort together to begin with our source water protection partners. And it all started about, I think it was about over a year ago, and they had, there was a request to give a couple workshops. And initially what was happening is that it was rolled out it was going to be a 590 nutrient management plan rollout, a nutrient management standard, as I should say. And many of you are aware of that. And so there was going to be two workshops that were planned, and it was the first workshop was going to be for the conservation partners, the state, the local, and the federal We were all going to come together, and basically we were going to be educated, if you will, on the nutrient management standard and in ways that we can move forward. But what happened here is that it kind of surprised everyone. Not only were they interested in the 590 standard, but they were actually pretty much hungry for the whole science around, if you will, source water protection, the science of protecting that area. Remember, these are communities working with the producers and the agencies, and so basically there was a hunger, if you will, hunger for conservation and also the planning process. So the first meeting was held. Excuse me, why don't you advance? Can you advance that slide? Sorry, folks, I'm getting ahead of myself. Advance it one more time. Okay. First meeting was held. It was a one-day workshop, and as you can see, there's about 30 attendees, if you will, from diverse and conservation partnerships, diversity and conservation partnerships, but very familiar in what you states are working with at your local level. Again, I might say that this was done kind of at the local level too. It's good to get that from bottom up driven. But when you looked at it, here was what was talked about. They were talking about the basics of source water protection. They were talking about that time of travel, if you will, to the capture zone, and I had mentioned that earlier. And that was that overlay that we were going to be providing out. And then there was a discussion about when you look at topographies, and for those of you that are geologists and soil scientists, you will know that that karst topography is really an interesting one, and there's a lot of cracks and crevices in that limestone. And basically, those are direct entryways down to the groundwater. And so, quite interesting. A lot of the parties were very interested in that, and also the alluvial system. There was also a discussion that came around in terms of what are the program goals? What are we going to get out of it? What do we want to achieve? And then there was shared success stories. And as you folks took a look at the showcases that were presented by Becky, those are quite powerful examples of what you can achieve by working all together. And then the last one was discussed was communication tools, marketing. What's the next step? How do we get this education and awareness out to all the partners, if you will, so that we can make this an even greater partnership for the greater Iowa? Next step, next slide. So what was the result? Well, as you folks can see, it was pretty much an overall success. And some of the results that we were really excited about was the improvement awareness of the tools and techniques for source water protection. Very well embraced by all that attended. And then there was, because of that, there was a number of feature articles that went out to through watershed newsletters and to the general public on how nitrogen affects drinking water quality. And it was a good move. It was a very good move, and that's all about marketing. So very happy with that. Next slide, please. Here's one of the reactions. We have about 99 or 100 conservation districts, and basically this is one of our regional, if you will, directors. And the source water protection meeting provided me a much better understanding on how land use and economic practices can impact groundwater. Why wellhead protection is such an important issue for many communities in Iowa. I had to actually, I didn't mean to read that to you folks, but I want you folks to know that this is a very powerful testimonial, and that we should never assume that all conservation partners have all of the knowledge. We can all learn together, and I think that's what this speaks to. We can all learn. Next slide. Following that up, of course, you have a meeting with water operators, and this was 40 communities attended, and you can kind of see what was what we were talked about. Pretty much similar to the to what we talked about in the previous with the partners, but I think we're kind of going more toward that conservation planning process. Next slide, please. Trying to hurry this up a little bit, folks. You can see that the overall rating was very good, and a lot of talk about communication, a lot of talk about partnerships, and quite a bit of and what do we get? Writing and completing the source water protection plan. Next slide. So here's just a testimonial from the participant, and it just speaks to the fact that people are excited, they want to get involved, and they're all about voluntary conservation. And of course, as Juan would talk, that's what we like to say too in NRCS. We're all about helping people help the land. Next slide. So what do we look at for the future? I think what we in the future, we're going to continue these efforts to if you will, increase our understanding and our customers' understanding of source water protection. We are going to be working together for planning and implementation, of course, and that's part of our process. But we do have a lot of tools in our box that can be used for the implementation of these practices, and that's what the EQIPs and the WIP and the EMA, all of that is that Juan had talked about earlier. Those are the tools in the box. But they need to be, you need to start with good conservation planning first. The other item that I did want to say here is we got to continue to strengthen our statewide conservation partnerships. Folks, I will let you know that in partnerships, if you do an effective partnership, as I've always said, 2 + 2 can equal 5. That's if all partners come to the table and everybody's working together. It's the power of people. It's the way we need to go. With that, I think we will close this out. Becky, we're done?
Sounds good. Thank you, Jay. And thank you, Deirdre.
Thank you both to Becky and Jay. That's going to conclude the webinar. We've gone over time, so we're not going to have time to handle any questions on the webinar today. Anybody from ASDWA have anything else to add here at the end?
No, just yeah. Sorry about going over the time, but I thought the presentations were excellent. I hope that everybody in the audience got a lot out of them. We will be posting the presentations and video audio of the webinar on ASDWA's website, so look for a notice about that in the near future. And we will also try to attempt to answer some of the questions that we received when we post the presentations as well. So thank you very much. Thanks to our presenters and thanks to the audience. And have a great day.
You too. Thank you.